Hi, I'm Whitney Espich, the CEO of the MIT Alumni Association, and I hope you enjoy this digital production created for alumni and friends like you.
Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining today's Career Lunch and Learn program, The Power of Conversation in a Polarized World, being brought to you by the MIT Alumni Association and is sponsored in part by the MIT Federal Credit Union, MIT Professional Education, and the MIT Sloan Executive Education. My name is Sarah Meyers. I'm the Education Program Manager at the Environmental Solutions Initiative at MIT, and I'll be serving as your moderator today. As a reminder, our webinar is being broadcast live. Throughout the program, you may submit your questions using the Q&A feature in your Zoom toolbar. For all of our listeners joining via YouTube, you may add your questions to the comments field. All questions will be held until the end of the presentation. Should you have questions during the presentation related to the activities, please submit and we will ask Jason in a timely manner to help us through the process. All registrants were sent a reminder email containing a link to a worksheet. If you did not get a copy or haven't had time to fill it out, don't worry. This webinar will still be productive and beneficial. I'm delighted to introduce today's speaker, Jason Jay. He's a senior lecturer and director of the MIT Sloan Sustainability Initiative. He teaches courses on strategy and innovation for sustainable business to hundreds of leaders every year. Through his writing, teaching, and community building, he empowers business leaders to help their organizations thrive while tackling the tough social and environmental challenges of our time. Before he began teaching, he ran an internet startup, traveled around the world, taught kindergarten, received a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's degree in education from Harvard University, worked as a consultant with Dialogus International, and earned a doctorate in organizational studies from MIT. Jason is also the co-author of Breaking Through Gridlock, The Power of Conversation in a Polarized World, which he will be referencing during his presentation today. With that, I'll turn things over to Jason.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Really appreciate your introduction there. And for all of you who are taking some time out of your day to be part of this webinar, welcome. So during the course of this conversation, I'm going to be using an interactive polling tool. And so what I want to do to just get us started is a little warm-up poll that's going to ask, what city are you joining from? This is going to be, to answer this poll is not going to happen through Zoom. You've got to open up a browser tab somewhere. I would recommend doing it on your phone if you're connecting to the Zoom through your computer, or just opening up another tab or window on your computer. And what you do is you go to open up the URL that's at the top here, pollev.com/btgbook. And that is a link to a poll that will be live for, just keep that webpage open for the duration of our webinar. And then whenever I ask a question, a new question, that new question will show up automatically on your screen. And then when you type in the answers, they'll percolate in and then be displayed for everybody. Your responses to these are anonymous throughout the course of the webinar. At the end of the session, if people want additional resources, it'll get your email address, and that will effectively de-anonymize your responses. But otherwise, no one's going to see sort of who's saying what. And normally when I do a workshop like this in person, where I've got 5, 10, or 100 people, I'll have the responses to these types of questions come up in little sort of individual thought bubbles. Because we have such a large community of people on the webinar today, which I'm really excited about, and it looks like right now we're at 225, I'm going to have the responses coming in this word cloud format, where it's showing essentially all the words that are flowing in, and then if there are words that are coming in with higher frequency, they show up in a larger font. And so that's what you're seeing here, which is that we've got a little collection of folks here who are in Boston, New York, various places, San Diego, San Francisco, and that's what's percolating through. But what's really cool here is we can see the reach and the spread of our MIT alumni community, because I see Germany, I see Boulder, where I'm from, which is very cool, Albuquerque, Heidelberg, Germany, Steubenville. So there's a lot of different places here. The other thing I just want to point out about the way that this poll results come in is you'll notice that if you typed in a 2-word answer like San Diego, what happened was that it broke those up as 2 different words that are registering separately in the word cloud. So the way that we're going to counter that in future polls, and it'll tell you this at the top, is that I'll ask for answers to either be just 1 word, or if it needs to be 2 words like San Diego, we'll just connect them with a hyphen, and then that will make it show up in the word cloud as a single word. The way, for example, someone wrote OC-CA, I think we're meaning Orange County, California. That's the way that popped in. So this is a little bit of housekeeping, but it looks like folks are successfully connecting to the Poll Everywhere tool here. So as I mentioned, I'm from the place where I'm from. The city that I'm joining from right now is Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'm in my office here at MIT Sloan, but I'm originally from Boulder, Colorado. And those of you who have spent time in Boulder know that it's a funny kind of place. It's a place where you're considered a wacko if you're not an environmentalist of some kind. And I grew up, with some of those seeds being planted, but carried on my career working on in education and educational technology and management consulting, and then eventually came back around to really wanting to work on sustainability and environmental issues. And I lead the Sustainability Initiative here at MIT Sloan. But when I first got started in this terrain, it was when I was a graduate student at MIT between 2005 and 2010. And we had this group of students who were all fired up about climate change, wanted to advocate for strong action on the environment. And very often what we found was that we found ourselves looking a lot like this guy, who I found through a Google image search for environmentalist. Loved this cartoon. We in fact hired this cartoonist for the book. And you see this kind of suspiciously Al Gore looking figure here, repent, reuse, recycle, SG, burn. And it's this kind of, I'm going to enforce my message. I'm going to tell you how to think. I'm going to preach, and then hopefully the world will change. And what we learned was that, sometimes that approach can be effective. Greta Thunberg is taking a very aggressive approach in the way that she's engaging with folks, and it's inspiring and powerful. But a lot of times it kind of falls flat, and conversations can go off the rails. So I met Gabriel Grant at a leadership program. The two of us were both working in the environmental field, and we started comparing notes about our experiences as advocates. And we reflected on where we had really stumbled and where our friends in this space had really stumbled. And then people started saying, and then we started talking about the common pitfalls of the environmental movement. And then a couple things started happening. One was that people in the environmental community said, hey, can you train us to be more effective advocates? Can you develop some kind of a pedagogy that could help us? And the second thing that happened was that people who were in other spaces, like in social justice arena or public health arena, or even just advocates for organizational change inside their companies, were finding that they were falling into the same pitfalls that we were falling into. It's just sort of like a natural thing that happens when we're fired up and passionate about a topic that connects to our values. So we developed this mechanism, these workshops, pedagogy, that you're going to get to experience today interactively. We've conducted them with more than 2,000 people. It's been piloted in universities around the world, actually, in different kinds of courses. And we distilled a lot of the lessons and stories and practice into that book, Breaking Through Gridlock, which is a way that you can follow up if you want further guidance on this stuff. But our intentions through all of this arc of work, and really in our webinar today, is to build your courage to have conversations about issues that matter to you. And that could be a whole range of issues, from, again, changes you want to make in your household, in your organization, in broader society, on any issue, anywhere across the political spectrum. We're really, we want people to give voice to their values. We want to support conversations that have two goals, two different objectives simultaneously, that lead to both stronger relationships and more innovative solutions to the challenges of our time. We think conversations generate innovation, they generate new solutions, and that, but that they occur within the context of relationships. And so if we can build our relationships and make progress, that is our definition of success. And then if we're effective in having these capacity building conversations, if we're able to build our skills, then we hope to build more inclusive and effective movements for change in organizations, communities, and society. And particularly in the polarized world that we're living in right now, it's very easy for people to find themselves preaching to the choir in small ensembles of fellow feeling people who agree with them, and not reach out across the lines and build the kind of consensus and collaboration that we need to solve real problems. So that's kind of the intention here. The big kind of insight or takeaway that I hope that you both understand and experience as a result of today's time together is that we have power in these conversations that otherwise can very often get stuck. We have power if we understand power in the right way. And just to illustrate this, I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of people who have gone through this workshop and taken value out of it. Brent was a participant in an executive education program here at MIT, and this was his report after this. I had gotten stuck with a VP of my company as I repeatedly proposed a change of course for a major project. In the workshop, I saw that I had been arrogant and overbearing in these conversations, and I decided to try being calm, listening, and welcoming. Literally the next day, a 15-minute plan meeting with him stretched to 45, and a bargain was struck. So this is like a workplace example of making use of these techniques. And then I wanted to gather a personal example. This came from a class, a master's level class, MBA level class that I taught. Passionate about healthy living, Michaela repeatedly cajoles her mother to address her obesity. Every time the conversation escalates into nagging, fights, and disappointment. Michaela realizes that her own antagonistic stance may be contributing to the problem. She shifts gears and acknowledges that she has been more interested in being right than in being helpful. She takes her mother to the grocery store, they plan meals together, and they enjoy 3 dinners together in the same week after not eating together for more than a year. And when this happened in one of my classrooms, it was really moving, and it was an illustration of something that people have done in a lot of different contexts. So what I'm going to ask you to do, in which we sent a little bit of prep for this in an email yesterday, is I'd like you to think of a conversation where you have gotten stuck, a real conversation. I'm defining stuck here. Stuck means that you are not achieving what you want to achieve. Either the conversation has gone off the rails, it's in conflict, it's sparring, it's unproductive debate, or you're avoiding the conversation entirely because of how you imagine it would go. You're just steering clear of the whole thing. And either way, you're stuck because you're not getting to achieve what you want. To get the most value out of this exercise today, the conversation that you reflect on should be, first, it should be about an issue that really matters to you, where you'd like to make progress. The conversation should be with a person that you really care about, something where the relationship matters to you. So it could be a boss or an executive in the company where your relationship with them affects your future performance, your future success. It could be a parent or a spouse or a sibling or a roommate where that relationship is just essential to the peaceful living of your life and you're feeling fulfilled. And then third is that this conversation that's stuck should still be stuck. Okay. I want it to be something that's current or alive, not something that you've already resolved in the past where you've already figured it out, you've already solved the problem. For us to work together today, the more you can choose a live example, the more value you're going to get out of it. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to take you through a step-by-step process of reflecting on this conversation and working to transform it. Now, some of you might have seen an email with a little worksheet attached to it. If you have that open or if you have that printed, that's great. It's not necessary, but it's just a way to kind of take notes on your reflections. Otherwise, you can just jot down notes on a piece of paper or in whatever digital medium is comfortable for you. So now what I want to do is I want to get a little snapshot from our audience here about the kinds of conversations and the kinds of issues that you are wrestling with where you would like to make progress. And again, remember that these poll responses are confidential as long as you, for the duration of our workshop here, at the end, there'll be a survey where I ask for an email address if you want further resources. That will identify your responses, but otherwise these are anonymous. So let's go to that. So let's go to the first question here. So this next poll, and again, if you have Poll Everywhere, this pollab.com/BTG book still open in that browser, name an issue where you would like to make progress but have gotten stuck. And I'm going to ask this to be one-word responses, or if you're going to use, if it's going to be 2 words or multiple words, hyphenate them so they can show up on the screen here as one word, the way that climate change is showing up here. So that's great. You guys are, my instructions are coming through. Or end relationship, right? Adult daughter, childcare, addiction, posture, nuclear power, screen time, a micromanager boss, Trump, gender gap, ashes and versus interment and a burial, vaccines, politics, children, technology transfer, board member, breadwinner, condo conflict, right? So a few of this, I'm pretty sure that one comes from New York. Getting ahead. So this is fantastic. And what we're seeing here is a really fantastic mix of what I'm going to call personal, organizational, and political issues. So there's personal issues here, like where should we live? Who should be the breadwinner in our household? Who should carry out elder care in our family? You have organizational issues here, like micromanager boss. And we have some societal issues here, like climate change, politics, various kinds, poverty, social justice, white supremacy. And some of those are going to show up at the most micro level. And so this is fantastic. This is exactly the kind of snapshot that I hope we would see from the MIT community, because this is a community that is taking on big issues. And again, the personal is political. These conversations about big societal questions like addiction or climate change will show up in our everyday lives. Okay, so this is a great snapshot of the issues. Now what I'm going to do is go to the next poll. And the next poll is going to be about who is the conversation with. So don't name the person's name here, but I want to know, who is this person to you, right? What is the relationship? And I think you can do that with a single word answer, or this kind of hyphenated or sort of all one word thing like fellow board member. So this is great. And again, what we're seeing here is a mix of personal, professional, and political contexts. Now, this part of the reason I like to do these word clouds is so that you can see what other people are wrestling with, and you can see that, you know, we're all in this together. Many of us have friends, spouses, bosses, moms, brothers that we are trying to engage in productive conversation with. This is also helpful for me because now I can coach you a little bit. And so I'm going to do a couple of little pieces of coaching based on some things I'm seeing here. So for example, one of the things that comes up, one of the things I saw was executives. Another one I saw was environmentalists. Anything that has an S in the end, I need to work with you on. So if you put in something where it's like a whole category of people, like executives of my company, or environmentalists that I run into, or I see clients here, that's great. There may be a whole category of people and a whole category of conversation that you want to be able to have better. But in order for us to do the coaching here and to do this really reflective exercise, I need you to be able to choose one specific context, one specific relationship, one specific conversation. So for example, like somebody said, you know, there's some people who could have said friends, but there's some more specific ones that says friend of 28 years. I have a sense that that's a particular person you have in your mind. If you think about executives, choose one executive of your company that you have access to, where that relationship matters, and where you would like to see some progress. And so I need you to kind of choose one person. Don't put their name in the poll here, but I do want you to choose one particular person. The other thing I just want to say is there's a couple of things here where there's some very high status individuals who are mentioned. So for example, board member, board or president or CEO, that if that is a person that you really have access to and you can realistically imagine having a conversation with them in the next 6 months, or the next, ideally actually the next 2 months, then that's a great example to choose here. If it's sort of like, I would love to wave a magic wand and get a conversation with that CEO of that big fossil fuel company or pharmaceutical company, then I want you to choose something different. I want you to choose the person who's going to be the most immediate stepping stone to getting to that really high, status person. So think of somebody who's going to be the first conversation that you need to have on the way to the next conversation. Okay, so now this is great. So now you have a particular example in mind. So now what I want to do is I want to point to the basic challenge, the basic tension or trade-off that we often experience in the context of a stuck conversation. And this is the way I would categorize that experience, that feeling of getting stuck. It's that I have a choice. I can either go to the left side of this picture or I can go to the right side of this picture. I can keep the peace, avoid the conversation, no politics at the dinner table, stay on common ground, stick with the small talk, talk about the weather. Or on the other hand, I can speak my mind, let things go off the rails, give them a talking to, raise my voice, put them in their place, show them the error of their ways. And this is often how I experience it when there's somebody that I disagree with. I feel like these are the only two choices that are available to me. And you may have had that same kind of experience. What I want to suggest here is that what we really want in these situations is not to keep the peace or to just speak your mind. What we really want, and again, this kind of the way that I framed this challenge, is that we want to preserve or strengthen the relationship, and we also want to make progress on the issues that matter. Okay, so yes, we want both, right? We want to preserve or strengthen the relationship, and we want to make progress on the issues that matter. But when we're stuck, we feel like we can only do one or the other or neither. Okay. So the first shift that I want to suggest here, the first coaching here, is to change the mental model, to change the way that you see the nature of these conversations. And that's just to go from a one-dimensional view of the world, one-dimensional view of this picture, to at least a two-dimensional view. And that two-dimensional view is to say, okay, there's relationship quality on one dimension, and there's progress on the issue on the other dimension. And so these two choices, these two poles are like, I'm going to preserve the relationship, but I'm going to stall out on the issue that matters to me. Or I'm going to charge ahead, guns blazing on the issue that I'm passionate about, but I might compromise the relationship in the process. Okay. And so what we experience, and sometimes we've either experienced this directly or we've run the simulation in their head to see, how this is going to go. And so we might have a situation where it's like, okay, look, I get along really well with my uncle as long as we just go fishing and don't talk about politics. That one time that I tried to talk about politics, we ended up really mad at each other for a long time. And so then we just went right back to being quiet about it and sort of keeping the peace. And so this is part of what it can feel like to be stuck, is to be going back and forth between these two poles. Now, there's another point in this landscape, which is down here, which is where there's somebody who I know that I disagree with so much about the last election, or about the issues in our country, or about how our organization should be run, that I just avoid them entirely. I don't develop a relationship with them. I don't charge ahead on the issue. I just steer clear of the whole situation. And that also can be stuck if that relationship is important to you and the issue matters to you. So there's some different things that can happen here. Maybe again, I don't know someone, I kind of know their politics, or their perspective, their position on an issue. I dig into it with them, and then I find, whoa, I really didn't get anywhere, so I'm just going to retreat back to staying in my own corner. In other situations, we might go try to build a relationship with them, but what we find is that relationship doesn't feel authentic because we're not able to give voice to what we care about, and so we sort of, again, go back to retreating. All of these are what I'm going to call pitfalls. They're all ways of getting and feeling stuck. And what I want to do today is see if we can find our way to a different space, a different point in this landscape, which is something where we're strengthening the relationship and making progress on the issue. And what I want to say about these pathways is that they're squirrely, right? Sometimes we have to go and spend some time just talking. I have a cousin that I differ with on a lot of politics. I called him up and we just spent the first 45 minutes of the conversation talking about our kids, catching up on our families, and what it means to be part of the same family with a grandmother who had just passed, before we then started digging into, okay, now we're also part of the same country here. How do we make sense of that, given how different we are on the political spectrum? And so that's kind of a pathway where we might be able to weave our way out here. In other cases, you start out with the issue, then you kind of make some peace, and then you learn how to have dialogue with each other. Then you go fishing together, and then, it's kind of a more labyrinthine pathway. I don't want to say that you can solve the whole problem in one shot, but I think we can make some progress. I'm going to pause for a second here because Sarah says that there's a question that she wants me to address from the Q&A.
Thanks, Jason. So the question was, what if this issue isn't necessarily with an individual, so it isn't with a person, but it's actually, it's a group consensus issue, or maybe not even a group consensus issue, but a group that has to make a decision on something and has to come up. How does this, does this apply in the same way? How does this work?
Great. So I would say that there's some scope conditions around this, which is that it is most helpful in those one-on-one relationships. But I would say that when a group has to come to consensus, the individual bilateral conversations matter a lot. So what I would suggest is that if you have a group where the group has to come to a decision, and it can't come to a decision because your viewpoint differs from somebody else's viewpoint, or maybe a couple other, you're part of one faction, there's another faction, then what I would recommend here is to choose a person who is on the other side, who's part of the other faction, and see if you can pull them aside for a one-on-one conversation in a comfortable environment where you both feel somewhat safe and where you can start to understand each other's perspectives and see if there's some overlap in or some ability to understand each other and find new possibilities that could work for both of you. And then you can bring those new ideas back to the group and then see if you can build interest in them among the larger group. So this is not a group facilitation methodology. This is a one-on-one conversation methodology, but I think that's an important building block toward building group consensus. The other thing I would say is that part of what we're going to do here is inquire into our way of being in these conversations and transforming our ways of being. And when we do that, we can show up with those new ways of being in a group conversation, and it will help us be more constructive. So let me move on and talk about what I mean by that. So again, the notion here is that we have power in these conversations if we understand power a little differently than we usually do. So what do I mean by that? Normally, this is the MIT community. We are a community of problem solvers. And what problem solvers do is that we look at the situation that we have in the world, in our organization, in our family, in our community, in our country, in our value chain. And we try to figure out, what can I do in order to have different results? What are the action steps that I can take that will change what's going on in the world? And this gets us a long way, right? If we can systematically understand our situation and then look at a bunch of different options for what to do about it, and then go try those things and produce a new result, that's problem solving. That's great. When we feel stuck and when we're dealing with the complexities of interpersonal relationships, there's another layer, another level that we have to deal with. Because oftentimes I've tried to do A, B, and C, and none of them have worked. I'm still stuck. So what we need to do is scratch one layer beneath the surface. The results that we have in the world are a result of what we do and the kind of conversations we have with other people, our ability to mobilize them, engage them, get them to share their resources, etc. But underneath that, there's another layer, which is our way of being. And our way of being is tied up in our conversations with ourselves. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, conversations with myself, I don't have conversations with myself. What's this guy talking about? That's exactly what I'm talking about, is that background conversation. So let me give you an example. I'm in my house, I go down to the basement, and I see that all the lights are on. And as you know, I sort of work in the environmental field. I see the lights are on, I go turn the lights off. I go upstairs, my wife's there, she's in the kitchen. And I say, someone left the lights on in the basement. Now, in that moment, what is my way of being? My way of being in that moment is, somewhat self-righteous, somewhat judgmental, somewhat overbearing. And it's funny, actually, I ask people how they would describe my way of being in that moment. And they'll say judgmental or accusatory, but I didn't accuse my wife of leaving the lights on. I said someone left their lights on in the basement. But it wasn't about the words that I said out loud, the conversation I had with others, remembering the words that I spoke. It was about my way of being. It was about the conversation I was having with myself, which is all the muttering I'm doing, saying, oh, why do I have to be the only guardian of green in this house? Why can't anybody else to think to turn the lights off? Can't somebody else help me out here? And like that sort of frustration showing up as me being judgmental, self-righteous, etc. And that shapes how that conversation is going to go. Now, fortunately, my wife has a good sense of humor. And she said at that moment, well, someone left the lights on in the shower this morning, and you know what? I just turned them off. So I got the zinger there. Certainly got to practice what I preach a little bit better. But it was, and that was an example where she and I can sort of play with each other because we know each other's ways of being. But in a lot of other contexts, we come in hot and that conversation goes completely off the rails. So the idea here of what we're going to do is that we're going to inquire into, or we're going to reflect on, what is the conversation with yourself that you're having about the other person in this example that you are fleshing out and that you're reflecting on today. And then we're going to get into what is your way of being in that conversation, and how has that shaped what has happened in those conversations. And then we're going to go through, I'm going to take you through a process of stopping, stepping back, and changing your way of being, bringing a new way of being to light, creating a new way of being. And then from that new way of being, new things will arise, new ideas will come to you about what to do and how to have those conversations. And those will produce new results that you get to have in the world. This is the process that produced those quotes at the beginning of the presentation today, was people going through kind of a diagnosis from right to left, and then a recreation from left to right. So first, I'm going to ask you to reflect on, what are you thinking and feeling about the other person, but not saying? That's the key aspect of the conversation with yourself. And remember, this is anonymous. What are you thinking and feeling about the other person, but not saying? And remember to use one word or a hyphenated phrase. They're closed-minded, they're selfish, they're stubborn. How can you be so stupid? No responsibility, they've got the wrong priorities, uncaring, unreasonable, disdain, blissfully ignorant, not doing your job, dumb, stupid, failure, lazy, selfish, idiot, arrogant. Okay, so fantastic. This is the nice thing about anonymous webinars and polls, is that people can really say what's on their mind. So now what we've got here is an interesting snapshot here, right? These are the things that you are thinking and feeling about the other person, but not saying. And what I want to suggest is, this background conversation bleeds through into the out loud conversation. So when I come up the stairs and I say, someone left the lights on in the basement, my wife knows the whole background conversation that I'm having about my self-righteous environmentalism. Okay. In fact, at the MIT Media Lab, Sandy Pentland's group, some of you may be exposed to this work, had these sociometric badges. They're like these devices hanging from your neck that have an accelerometer, and they listen to the prosody of the voice, the rise and fall, the tone, the volume, but not capturing the words. And Sandy was able to gather data from these sociometric badges as people interacted with each other and did negotiation exercises. And he was able to predict the outcome of negotiations with a very high degree of certainty just from listening to the prosody of the voice and the body movements of the accelerometer. Nothing about the content of what was said. There's a huge amount of what gets communicated that is nonverbal, that is, we're very good at recognizing these sort of honest signals. And it's even true over text message, WhatsApp, etc., in the way that we use emojis and the timing of our responses. There's a lot that people pick up on, oftentimes poorly interpret, and there's misinterpretation all the time that happens on digital media. All of this works more fluidly in in-person conversations. But what I wanted to say is that this background conversation that we see on the screen right now bleeds through and affects our conversations. And so if this is your background conversation, if this is what's going through your mind about the other person, that they're stubborn, closed-minded, ignorant, brainwashed, stupid, narcissistic, etc., what is your way of being in that conversation? So, and again, one word here if you can. So this is like, I was saying, I showed up as judgmental and arrogant. how would the other person characterize your way of being in that conversation? Or if you had, a video camera watching you and some neutral panel was able to observe you and say, that person is being a little, and so now we see what this looks like. A little frustrated, angry, defensive, self-righteous, annoyed, short-fused, incredulous, know-it-all, holier than thou, dictatorial, superior, closing off, naive, unmoved. So quiet. Now notice that there's a couple different kinds of stuck conversation. There's the ones where we go in hot, the self-righteous, defensive, entitled, arrogant form. And then there's the one where we're avoiding the conversation and sort of keeping ourselves safe, which is the resignation, quiet, passive, which is also another kind, disengaged, which is another kind of failure mode here. So I want you to, for a moment, to just step back and kind of just look at this word cloud. I want you to ask the question, if this is my way of being, how effective am I going to be? If this is our way of being as advocates for data-driven solutions to problems, which is something that I think unites the MIT community, how effective are we going to be? For those of us on the lefter side of the political spectrum, if this is what characterizes progressive advocates or advocates for environment and social justice, how effective are we going to be? And for those of us on the right side of the political spectrum, if this is what characterizes advocates for strong family and religious community and small government, then how effective are we going to be? There's a big challenge here in that we fall into these sorts of patterns. So, and this is fantastic to get this kind of data actually about the ways of being that show up when we get stuck. And it reflects what we've seen across a huge array of different contexts. This is aggregated from a number of different workshops. We see a lot of the same kinds of ways of being. So for Gabe and I, my co-author and I, this presented a really important puzzle, intellectual puzzle, which is that I think we know that these ways of being are probably not going to help us get where we want to go. And so if they're not helping us be effective, then why do we fall into them? Why do we get stuck in them? Humans are pretty good at self-correcting, but this seems to be something that is not self-correcting. So what's happening here? And this is where this metaphor of the pitfall we found very useful, which is this idea that, so what is a pitfall? A pitfall is literally a trap. You're walking along in the grass. It looks like a nice patch of grass to walk on, but then all of a sudden you find yourself being stuck in the trap. Why did you walk into that trap? Because there's some kind of bait. There's something that you're holding on to that is making it nice and cozy in that trap, and that keeps you attached to that way of being. And so therefore the key here of moving past this, of changing the way we approach things, is to let go of that bait. And letting go of that bait means walking forward into a future that we want more than we want the bait. Okay, so now I've used this metaphor to give you this little illustration of this guy with the star and the bait in the trap that has us staying stuck. Even if there's some costs of being stuck, like we're harming the relationship or we're not making progress. So what do I mean by bait? What does this look like? Well, there are some common traps. And again, I'm very familiar with the ones that come from kind of the sustainability movement. So here's an example of some background conversations that I've heard in my own head and many of us have heard in our heads. I'm more virtuous than you because I recycle. I see more than you because I know the science. I see things from a systems perspective. I know what you want better than you do because I read philosophy and positive psychology and take time for self-reflection webinars about self-actualization. I'm not even going to have this conversation with you because you either don't get it, you can't get it, or you get it and distort the truth for your own malevolent purposes. So what's the bait for these folks? It is that there's a psychological payoff that they're holding on to. And that psychological payoff is getting to feel right and make the other person wrong, getting to feel righteous, getting to feel certain about your answer and your point of view in a complex world, and getting to keep yourself safe in your own point of view with the crowd of your own allies that agree with you. I mentioned that in the ways of being and in the beginning, there's a couple different kinds of stuck. There's the kind of stuck where the conversation goes off the rails because you're coming in hot. That's more the right, righteous, and certain pattern. There's also the kind of stuck where you're just avoiding the conversation entirely, and that's more the staying safe style of the bait. So, what I'm doing here is peeling back some layers of the onion in terms of reflecting on what's really going on in these conversations. First, I just asked you to think about what's the issue, who's this with, and you can kind of remember how that conversation either went or how you imagined it. Then we went another layer deeper, which is, what are you thinking and feeling but not saying to the other person? And then a little deeper is, what's the way of being that you show up with that arises when that's your background conversation? And now we're peeling back the layers even one more, which is, what are you holding on to? What do you gain when the conversation loses? That makes it so that this is, even though you're not getting it to be effective, you're at least getting to be right, or you're getting to feel certain, or you're getting to keep yourself safe. You're not changing the other person's point of view, but you're safe in your own. So I'm just going to do like a kind of multiple choice style poll here, just to see kind of how this language resonates with you. Are you a person who, in this stuck situation, is keeping yourself safe? Or is it more that you're kind of striding in, trying to be right, being righteous, being really certain of your perspective and unwilling to entertain other points of view? Of course, there's overlap and connection between these things. Or is there something else? Is there some other kind of anchor or bait in that trap that you think might be keeping you stuck, might be keeping you anchored in that way of being? And what we're seeing here, just kind of statistically across the population of people in this webinar, is that, being right is showing up as a pretty big one. And we should not be surprised, because this is MIT. All of us were rewarded for the first 18 years of our lives for getting all of the right answers in order to get into MIT. And then we were rewarded through, maybe despite the, semester that you may not have been graded as an undergraduate, getting the right answer is what you're constantly being rewarded for as an expert. So of course, getting to be right is going to be a strong anchor and bait in the context of this community. But of course, on anything where, we're trying to bring facts to bear on values-laden issues. And if we're going to do it, it's because we feel strong about the values and we feel strong about the facts. So there's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with this being the bait for you. And there's nothing wrong with the way of being that I put before. It's not about right and wrong. What this is about effectiveness and what's going to help you move forward in these conversations that matter to you. And what I'm going to suggest is that when you're stuck in the trap, the key is that you're stuck only doing one thing. You're stuck only pursuing the bait and stuck with that one way of being. And so you're not really expanding the repertoire in that idea of, be, do, and have. You might be trying to do a lot of different things, but you're not trying alternative ways of being. So we haven't really expanded our repertoire yet. And that's now what it's time to do, is that when we're ready to let go of the bait in the trap, then we can start to free ourselves up to explore and expand and try on other ways of approaching the conversation. And that's going to be about, again, expanding our repertoire. Okay, so now this is the part where I'm going to help you let go of the bait. And this is the part where the webcast is going to get a little weird. And where you're going to say, yeah, that guy really is from Boulder, Colorado. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through sort of a guided meditation. And the reason here is that, again, if what we're inquiring into is your way of being, the more that we've thought about this conversation that you're stuck in, the more that way of being is probably resurfacing. Now, maybe you're letting go of it a little bit, as we pointed out, but I want to actually create a new space for you to operate in. And so that's why I'm going to ask for you to try this out with me. If you'd like to, you can close your eyes. Take a nice deep breath. And another nice deep breath. I want you to consider the context and conversation that you've been reflecting on with this particular person around this particular issue. And I want you to imagine a future where this conversation has gone really well. You have achieved the dual goals. You have made progress on the issue that you care about, and you have improved the quality of the relationship, the dialogue, the interaction. Let yourself be in that future where you have achieved these goals. You don't have to worry about how you got there, or what the pathway was, or what you said. Just let yourself be in that future where you've made progress on the issue and improved the quality of the relationship. Now consider what becomes available in that future. What becomes possible for you? What becomes possible for the other person? What becomes possible for the two of you together? And what becomes available in wider circles? Perhaps the organization or the community that you are both part of in the wider world. Let yourself experience that future. What I want you to notice is, in that place, what is your way of being? What is your way of being in the future that you want? When you are ready, you can open your eyes so you can share what you experienced in the poll. After you share your response to this, you can just sort of take this in, this word cloud as it expands. Curious, relieved, calm, relaxed, hopeful, collaborative, considerate, appreciative, proud of the other, supported, accomplished, unstuck, let go, expressive, excited, joy, trusting, valued, content. At peace, without barriers, not agitated, more receptive to ideas. So I want you to consider, and this is one place in our MIT context where plagiarism is permitted and encouraged. If you see something in this picture that is a way of being, that if you brought that way of being into the conversation, you could see how it could make a difference, then make that part of your vision for what how this conversation could go. What I want to point out, the notion here, the concept here is that the old ways of being around frustrated and angry and self-righteous and so on correlate with a conversation being stuck. And these are the ways of being that correlate with your future imagining of the conversation going well. And so the move here is to try on bringing this way of being to the conversation from the beginning, not just letting it be the result of having succeeded or won, but show up as curious, as calm, as excited, as valued, as cooperative. Show up as trusting, expansive, and just see what happens. Again, this isn't about right and wrong, good and bad. It's about try this on, expand the repertoire, okay? So now what you've done is that you've started the new process, right? The reinventing the conversation part, which is showing up with a new way of being. Now, and you've done a lot of work on yourself, which is to reflect and then possibly transform your way of being. Now, we also need to think about the other person and where they're coming from. How we often experience these conversations is that I'm showing up with my particular way of being, but also with my position. And there's the other person who's showing up with their position, and it's about this clash between different positions. The underlying dynamic is that there's my values, the things that I care about, and your values, the other person's values, what they care about. And what's happening in a conversation that is really getting stuck or that we're avoiding is that we feel like there's just too much distance between these two things. And that if any kind of compromise we might come to would mean me having to give up on what I care about and them having to give up on what they care about. And in the space of that, these ways of being, of frustration and so on arise. So we want to show up to the conversation with a new way of being, but we also want to acknowledge what's going on the other side of the conversation, which is that they are afraid of giving up on what they value if they were to take your view and position seriously. and you are afraid of giving up on what you value if you were to take their view and position seriously. So sometimes what you have to do in these conversations is explicitly note this kind of trade-off and say, look, I want to do something different. I want to acknowledge that there's two different values here, and I've tended to argue for this, and you've tended to argue for that. But let's see if we can explore a new space together, an innovation space, where we come up with new ideas, new possibilities, new ways of approaching public policy, the way we run our organization, the way we run our family, that can have us, that can have us working on these multiple values at the same time. And so the next gesture I want you to do, now that you're maybe coming from this way of being that is curious, open-minded, collaborative, is to ask yourself, what does the other person value in this conversation? What is it that they have been standing for that has them creating this position that I have disagreed with? What is it that they care about? And that they would actually recognize that they care about, not just what I sort of judge them as only caring about, but how would they say what they're standing for? So, in a big government, small government conversation, maybe it's about freedom. Maybe it's about autonomy. Maybe it's about preserving wealth and preserving comfort. And those are fine. People can want those things, and in fact, all of us probably want those things to some extent as well. So I want you to ask for a second, what did they value that you may have undervalued in past conversations, or at least that if you acknowledge that they valued it, they would feel heard? Okay, now there's a couple of things I want to coach on here. So value of tradition is, value of tradition is often something that people value and want to stand for. I just want to point out, I just want to inquire a little bit. So for some of those where it's set, where I see tradition or actually, I don't see too much of that during this round. One question I like to ask is, what is it about the tradition that they value? Sometimes we'll see people, you'll see people saying, well, they just value the old way of doing things, or the existing way of doing things, or the status quo. And the question I want to ask is, what do they value about the status quo? What is the status quo? What about the status quo is meaningful and important to them? Now, what we're seeing here is, freedom, stability, order, independence, respect, capitalism, professional success as a goal, no one tells me what to do, connection to the past, ability to spend money, harmony. So these are great. This is actually, I think that these are mostly things that the other person would recognize in themselves. So this is the empathy, or maybe the beginnings of inquiry. One of my favorite answers to this poll, which I don't see right now, is I don't know. Because a lot of times we don't know what they value. We've just been so focused on our own position and what we care about that we're not even really trying to ask that question. And I don't know is a phenomenal first step to start that inquiry and start to try to understand what's going on the other side of the lines. But this is great. So I'm seeing a whole variety of different values that are experienced as being in conflict with your own. So now what we have is we've got, and it's very interesting that we see experience now being the biggest one here. So the way I'm interpreting that is they value their experience and maybe their authority that comes from their experience if you're a more junior person or a more, that's one way that I'm interpreting experience here, and hopefully that's okay. If I'm totally missing the mark, send that in Q&A, which I'll deal with in a little bit. So now what we've done is we've gone through this series of inquiries. And now we're going to take those different pieces of this puzzle, the answers to all these polls, and we're going to put it all together into kind of a script, kind of a Mad Lib game, if you will, which I call transformative contrasting. So contrasting because you're going to learn how to draw a contrast between what the person expects about the conversation and what you're really there to do. And a contrast between the kind of thing that's happened in the past when you've been stuck and the kind of thing that you want to have happen that you saw in that meditation. And it's going to be transformative because it's going to change the basic background conversation and change the ground that you're standing on. So here's what that looks like. Here's the script. And this is on the second page of the worksheet that we distributed by email as well. I would like to talk about blank, the issue you care about. I'd like to talk about the lights being on in the basement. Given your past experience, you might expect me to show up as blank, your old way of being, and to get stuck with blank, your bait. So for me in that example, given your past experience, you might expect me to show up as judgmental and self-righteous and to get stuck with being the right and righteous green guy all the time. You might think I'm going to try for solutions that force us to trade off convenience and smooth operation of our house, like that time I made us sort all the recycling on the kitchen countertops. Like previous efforts when blank, you kind of illustrate, you acknowledge when you have helped things get off the rails. I'm sorry for times where I and others have done this in the past. If I fall into that trap, please point it out. My intention today, and this is the contrasting moment, my intention today is instead to be blank, right? Whatever that was, collaborative, open-minded. In this case, for me, it is loving. It's the context of my wife and our household. What I really want is blank, the future you want for the relationship and the outcome. And I'll just remind you in that meditation, one of the things I said was, I asked you was, what would become available if that conversation were to go well? If you were to strengthen the relationship and move forward on the issue, what would become available for the wider context, the organization, the community, the wider world? What is that future? And, for me in this example I'm using with the lights, it's, I want our family to be a net positive contributor to the world. And our home environmental footprint is part of that, but it's only part of it. Let's work together to find creative ways to break the real or perceived trade-offs. Let's invent together. And this is sort of the script that you can try. Now, if we were in a workshop in person, what I would do at this point in time is I would have you get into pairs, and I'd have you turn to the person next to you, fill out the script with all the reflection you've done, and then read the script aloud to the other person sitting next to you. And then I would just switch roles and have the other person read their script back to you. That's not going to be practical on this webinar, both because of time and because of the technology. But what I invite you to do is fill out the script and then go to a trusted confidant, someone who's removed from the situation, who's safe, who will, from the situation, but who will call you on your nonsense, your BS, and who will push you to do this well. And just read the script to them. And then ask them, how did that sound to you? What was your experience of it? And what you'll find is that there really is a shift in the tone of the conversation that happens with this transformative contrasting thing. And if you create a new context for you to go talk to the person that you've been stuck with, don't dive right in reading the script, but start with the normal niceties and small talk and building the context, but then say, look, there's something that I want to talk to you about, and here it is. And then put this in your own words, or even read the script. It actually kind of works okay. But put it in your own words, and then use that as a kickoff for a new way of having conversation. And I think you will be very surprised by the results. Now, I want to say that it is not, like I said at the beginning, it's not a one and done, sudden, permanent transformation of all conversations, okay? But it's a step in a particular direction. And Sarah Meyers, who is the moderator here on this call, shared with me after doing this workshop this wonderful poem that I just want to share with you. I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm lost. I'm helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place, but it isn't my fault. It still takes me a long time to get out. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. I walk down another street. So what I want to do is invite you to see this as a moment of transformation of that conversation that you can do, and also just to know that it's going to be a journey. But it's one that I'm going to invite you to take a stand and start on. I have been blown away for the last hour seeing these polls and how deeply you guys have tucked into this and found real examples, really reflect on your ways of being, really considered the debate, considered what they're valuing. And I'm going to invite you to just go do this. Use the show up with a new way of being, use the transformative contrasting script, and go take action. And I'm even going to push a little further, which is I want to ask you to kind of make a commitment to yourself and to implicitly to this larger community, to go have a new conversation by a particular date. A real commitment isn't just like a New Year's resolution, like someday this year I'll get in shape. It's, by November 3rd, I will reach out to this person and go have this conversation. Or I'm on this, I will have this conversation today. That may be where you're at, and that is phenomenal. It may not be where you're at, and that's also fine. So maybe where you're at is, I can see this is going to take some courage, but I'm putting it in my calendar and I'm committed to following through this week. Now, you may be in a different place. You may be in a place of, whoa, things just got real. I'm going to seek out some coaching from my friends, and then I'll move forward. Also great. And then some of you may be in the place of, on second thought, I can't see myself engaging in this yet. Perhaps I'm okay with my bait and my old ways of being. I'm poking some fun in that last one, but it's totally fine to be wherever you are. And now there's 36 results that have come in, so I'm going to start showing the responses. And this is where we get to sort of see where people are at on the call. And what we can see is that a few of you are saying, I'm on this, I will have this conversation today. That's fantastic. Insight to action. Some of you, a larger number of you are saying, I can see this is going to take some courage, but you're committed to following through this week, which is fantastic. And then some of you are feeling a little bit more hesitant. Maybe you want some more support and some more reflection, or maybe you want to choose a different example, one where you feel like, you can make some more progress on, and then just run through the same exercises again. That's also totally fine. What I want to do is I want to offer you some ways to help you kind of keep this process going. And so the last poll here is a little survey, which I'm going to click over to right now. And this survey is is just going to ask you about any further support that you would like. And if you check yes on any of these on any of these supports that I can provide you, or that Gabriel, my co-author, can provide you, the next question is, it'll ask you for your email address. And then if you type in your email address, then we will know to reach out to you with, either the slides or the website, or help in bringing this into other contexts. Just know, to full disclosure, is that if you type in the email address, then what will happen is that we would be able to see the arc of your responses to all the polls, all the previous polls, as I warned you earlier. And that actually can be helpful, because then what we can do is we can actually generate that transformative contrasting script and send it to you via email. There's also a link, which I'll share at the end, to a bot, a conversation generator bot that's like an interactive online thing that takes you through the same process again and generates that transformative contrasting script for you, so you could give this another shot. But this way, in this webcast, you got to see sort of the live version. So I'm going to let these surveys are going to stay open, and you can fill them out as we go here. But what I want to do is, in parallel, is just kind of summarize and then address a couple of the questions here. So first off, just to summarize the whole process, this whole reflective process, it is, we can think of it as a few steps. One is locate the bait and let it go. Takes a few steps of reflection, locate the bait, let it go. Acknowledge the trade-off that they are fearing, that what they worry about giving up. Draw the contrast between what they worry that you're there to do and what you're really there to do. Help them let go of that fear. And then invent together, come up with new ideas to try to solve the problems together. That's kind of the arc of this. And if you want, there's a TEDx talk I did in Boca Raton that's on the web, which kind of uses this to just give a little 15-minute summary of this process. Further resources are available on the web through the book. The QR code here, or the URL, is this bot, this conversation generator, where you can essentially go through the reflection again. It'll generate the transformative contrasting script for you. The video of the meditation is even there embedded in the webpage, and if you want some more help. Now, what I want to do is, Sarah has been sending me a few questions that have come in over the webcast Q&A. And so I'm just going to address a few of these. So the first one was, this is actually a very interesting one that I want to touch on. For me, so the question says, for me, there is a difference between the actual conversation and imaginary conversations I almost can't avoid having between the actual ones. Safe is the bait for my actual conversations. We just avoid the issue. But right or righteous is the bait in my imaginary conversations, in between the conversations. Does any of your work recognize this tension? That is just a fantastic insight. Whoever shared that, I really appreciate that. So this kind of, again, it's like you go into these conversation, you're talking with the person, you're sort of avoiding the issue, and then you walk off and you're like, oh, that guy is such a, so you've got a right and righteous thing going off when you're by yourself, and then a safe thing going on in the person. And I think that is a archetypal pattern. Like, it just happens all the time. And so it requires dealing with both of them, dealing with both of those baits in slightly different ways. So the right and righteous one, I think you deal with by doing that meditation where you visualize how the conversation could go. You try to create a different way of being, and you try to ask yourself what experiences might they have had in their lives that had them coming to value what they value, and what news sources or data sources or whatever are they paying attention to, who are they listening to that has them formulating a position based on those values, and how can I sort of understand where they're coming from to the point where I might be able to think about having a conversation and in a way that's a little bit more open-minded and that deals with right and righteous. So that's one thing, is sort of this like opening of the mind and heart a little bit to deal with the right and righteous. To deal with the safe is a different thing. That requires some courage. That requires, you know what? Really focusing on, why does this matter to me? What am I really trying to accomplish here? What does success look like? Is it worth it for me? You know, a lot of contexts, I'm not suggesting that you should go into every conversation to talk about every topic. I want actually to be much more intentional and deliberate about what it is that you're trying to do. What are you trying to accomplish? And if you can get clear on what you're trying to accomplish, the issue side of that future vision, that might give you the courage to say, you know what, I can't get away anymore with leaving this issue onto the table. I've got to bring it out. And so you've got to develop, so generate open-heartedness and empathy to deal with right and righteous, generate courage to deal with safe. Okay, next one is, I hope he will address how introverts can work with this information. I often just need the other person to stop for a bit and not move on without me while I process. I think that's fantastic. I know and love, and very close to me, a lot of people who are introverts who love that book, Quiet, that sort of illustrated the value of being introverted. It's not my stance, so I will probably stumble through an answer to this question. But I think what I would say is that the transformative contrasting approach works well for this, because what you can do is you can say, you know, the last time we had a conversation, I sort of stayed quiet in the conversation, and I built up over the time of our chat a little bit of just anxiety and frustration because you were continuing to talk and share your points of view, but I never, I wasn't asking for the space to be able to process and just a little bit of time that I need to be able to digest. And as a result, I walked away from the conversation feeling like I wasn't as effective and you weren't as effective as we could have been. And I want us to get the most out of this relationship that we can. And so I would just like to make a request, since I'm someone who needs a little bit more processing time, to just, can we have a moment to just kind of pause in these conversations and have some silence time? That is going to require courage. It's not an introverted thing to do, to stand up and ask for that. But once you do, you've made space for yourself to have that kind of processing time. And again, the key with the language that I chose there is to keep the agency with you and to keep the responsibility with you. You're not blaming the other person for not giving you processing time or for not shutting up. You're taking responsibility for not asking for that space, and that makes it possible for them to take responsibility for shutting up. I hope that makes sense as a distinction. Okay, so next question here is, how does this apply to a conversation in which the two parties have different stakes in the topic of contention? For example, a conversation between a member of a dominant social group and a member of a non-dominant social group. So this is a really critical question, and you can think about this in terms of LGBTQ conversations, conversations about race, conversations about class, conversations about gender. What you're raising here is something that's very important. I'm really glad that someone brought it up. When I said in the beginning of the whole thing, I said, you have power in these conversations if we think about power in a new way. In a way, that's almost a dangerous thing for me to say as a straight, cis, white male, okay, is that I have a lot of power that's just inherent to how I show up in a conversation from the moment it starts. And so for me to go around saying, well, you can have more power if you just change your way of being, could come across as being really sort of cavalier and not getting it. And so I want to just totally acknowledge that those power differentials exist in our culture, in our society, in all the cultures and societies, whether it's, caste in India with, where my half my family is from, or race and gender and sexual orientation here. I think how to raise how to show up in a way of being that is empowered, that is confident and loving at the same time, is a real challenge when you are part of a non-dominant social group. And that could even be, even just in the hierarchy of an organization, in a university, if you're a staff versus a faculty, and we have different valences of status, what it means to show up as powerful in that conversation as a staff member is different. So I think I just, first of all, I just want to acknowledge it. I want to acknowledge this as an area of blind spot for me, and where I don't have really great answers, except just to say that I think as much as possible, going back to what I said to the person who was introverted, is that the more that you are capable of taking responsibility for, the more you create the dynamic where where it's possible for them to take responsibility. So if you sort of acknowledge, look, I'm part of this non-dominant group, or you're not gonna say that, but you're this and I'm a that, and because of the way that happened, that tends to work out in our culture, I have tended to show up in conversations either kind of strident and aggressive, or sort of passive and self-doubting, and I want to operate from a different place here, because I think that I do have something that's valuable to say that I hope you can hear. That there's a way of being there, again, which is responsible, confident, and also open-hearted at the same time, that might get you somewhere. But again, I think I wish I had the real embodied lived experience that of some of those particular hierarchies that might help more. Okay. There's a question here that says, a lot of this, oh, actually, wait, let me go back to this earlier question that I just want to make sure to address. So one was, does this whole phenomenon vary generationally? Like, I'm interpreting that, and is this particularly true on social media? So how, if we were having this workshop 30 years ago versus now, how would it be different, or with younger people, older people? What I've experienced so far doing workshops with age ranges that go from undergrads, sort of 17, 18, all the way up to very senior executives and retiring people who are moving into the next phase of their careers, everybody gets stuck. And everybody gets stuck with right, righteous, certain, and safe. It's why we chose those as sort of primary colors. These are sort of human phenomena, our ways of being show up in similar kinds of ways. So there's some aspect of it that's just about our humanity. Social media makes things worse. Social media, any kind of anonymous interaction, what it does is it removes the relationship component out of that whole sort of two-dimensional view, which is a really constructive, innovative, effective, forward-moving conversation, is one where people are attending both to the relationship and to the issues at play. And what happens in social media and other anonymous formats is that people are just charging forward on their opinions and advocating for the opinions of their group or themselves. And there's no relational context. There's no camaraderie. There's no shared fellow feeling. There's no context for that because there's no name. So my favorite stuff on social media these days are things like conversations with people who hate me. This guy, whose name I'm forgetting right now, Marin, I think is the last name. And what he does is he's got a presence online. He gets a lot of haters in social media and comments and so on. And he tracks them down and goes and has conversations with them. And then he facilitates, he goes and he finds other people who have gotten flamed online and then puts the flamer and the flamed into the same conversation and helps them actually talk to each other as human beings. And I think that is, and the outcomes are really, really interesting and beautiful. And so I think the generational difference here that I notice is that millennials and younger are just not quick enough to pick up the phone and talk to somebody verbally or go meet with them face to face. There's an over reliance on these kind of on social media and other intermediated communications. Just pick up the phone, just go talk to the person. I was the last generation, like I'm 42 years old. When I graduated from high school in 1995, we were getting our first AOL connections. But I grew up through junior and high school using a telephone. And so for me, when my students and so on who have grown up from the beginning always with text as a primary medium of communication, it tends to lose things. So I would say if you're going to go and have these conversations in a new way, using the script or whatever, try going one more high contacts than you had before, or go from text to phone, go from phone to face, or just jump to face. Do it in a way where you can really get that full human interaction. Okay. And then let's see, it's 1:30. I think we probably have to close here. I think I'm getting the hook, but I really appreciate people staying on. It looks like we still have 192 participants online. So everyone's patience is really, really appreciated.
Thank you, Jason. This has been fantastic. This has been a great presentation. And the MIT Alumni Association thanks you as well. Thank you to all the alumni viewers for tuning in. As a reminder, today's presentation will be on the Alumni Association YouTube channel under the Career Lunch and Learn playlist in about a week. If you have any questions, you can email at alumnicareers@mit.edu. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us. And for more information on how to connect with the MIT Alumni Association, please visit our website.